For the second night in a row, Baty and Francisco Alvarez were the key cogs that led to a Mets comeback win. The baby Mets really now seem to be the grown Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, back in, I want to say May of 2023, Francisco Lindor coined the term baby Mets to refer to Baty, Francisco Alvarez, and I believe Mark Vientos, who are all trying to help a struggling veteran team get back to their previous heights where they won 101 games in 2022, and then ended up being an awful season. And a lot was put on these young players, and they were just not ready to perform. Alvarez did the best of the group, hit the 25 home runs, played great defense behind the dish, but he was a really streaky hitter. Baty got the keys to third base, and then eventually got them taken away from him as he just could not contribute at that position. And Mark Vientos struggled all year to find his footing, didn't have a defensive home, was basically being asked to be a right-handed complement to Daniel Vogelback for a lot of the year at DH, and just did not hit. Now here we are a couple years later, and a lot has changed for the baby Mets. Mark Vientos had an incredible 2024 season. Francisco Alvarez, Baty, they still did not quite establish themselves. So going into the year, it was all about Vientos. This year, Vientos has struggled, and in his place, Baty has really ascended to be potentially the third baseman of the future yet again. We're seeing him consistently, night after night, make big plays. Francisco Alvarez gets demoted down to AAA, something that none of us would have expected. And yet here he has come back looking like a completely different player. And for the second night in a row in his return, it is Francisco Alvarez who plays hero as the Mets come from behind to beat the Angels and win a series early. And it's Baty and Alvarez that have been the MVPs of this series. Not Francisco Lindor, not Juan Soto, though he has contributed, not Pete Alonso, he is struggling. It's been the bottom of that lineup. And those two guys have not just been doing it offensively, they've been doing it with their defense as well. The first inning, Frankie Montas, he ends up giving up a double after striking out the leadoff man. Mike Trout comes up, gets a base hit to right field. Juan Soto comes up firing a perfect throw home on a hop, on a line, and Alvarez able to make the catch, dive, put a good tag on, and get that runner out at the plate. Montas ends up getting through that inning unscathed. Second inning, he gave up a solo homer after getting the first two outs of the inning. Jorge Soler took him deep. He settled in from there in the third and the fourth inning. Montas would retire the side in order. In the fifth inning, he allowed two doubles with a walk sandwiched in the middle. That scored 2 runs. He had to face a situation with 2 runners in scoring position and 1 out going up against Mike Trout. Got a big strikeout. He issued a walk that loaded the bases, and then a fly ball to Jeff McNeil was how the Mets got out of the inning. McNeil kind of deked everybody, pretending like he didn't see the ball, and then he was able to complete the catch on the warning track to help Montas escape. So the Mets were trailing 2-0 when they came to bat in the bottom of the 5th inning. The first 2 guys get out. So here comes Baty with 2 outs. He drives a ball into right center field, gets a double ahead of Francisco Alvarez. Alvarez falls behind the count 0-2. He then sees a ball, gets into a 1-2 count, fouls off a couple of tough pitches to extend the at-bat, sees another ball as the count evens at 2-2. Francisco Alvarez then gets a fastball in the zone. He does not miss it, crushes it out to left field, able to get just enough, and it leaves the yard for a 2-run homer. All of a sudden, it's a new ball game. And speaking of young Mets, Ronnie Mauricio then gets a base hit, steals second base, and scores on a single by Brandon Nimmo. All of a sudden, Frankie Montas has a lead, and the Mets have flipped the game. Montas would go back out there in the sixth inning, strike out the first two batters that he faced, then give up a base hit and was pulled as Carlos Mendoza trusted the bullpen to get through the rest of the game, and they did exactly that. Rico Garcia got the final out of the sixth, then the first two outs of the seventh inning. Reed Garrett got the final out of the seventh inning on a soft liner that Brett Baty made a nice sliding catch on. Baty would make the final out of the eighth inning as well, and even better play as he moved over to third base for defense with, I believe, Acuna coming in. Actually, I think it was McNeil that came in first, and then when McNeil drew a walk, Acuna came in as a pinch runner. But regardless, Baty slid over to third base for the final inning, something that the Mets will continue to do. They obviously like Ronnie Mauricio's defense at third more than second, and they love Baty at either spot. So Baty's been starting at second base, moving over to third, and he made just an outstanding play on a rocket off the bat of, I believe it was Jorge Soler, 104 miles per hour, got to Baty in a hurry. He sort of olayed it, but did stay in there. It wasn't just, a fearful olay where he just stuck the glove out and found it. He stayed in there. He was going to feel it to his side because if that ball bounced up, hit him in the chest, it's going to hurt. But he stayed in there, worked from the ground up, made a great stop, fired to first base, got the final out of that eighth inning. Reed Garrett had struck out the first two batters of the eighth, so a really good appearance by Garrett to get 4 outs and bridge the gap to Ryan Stanek, who did bend in the ninth inning, gave up a couple of hits, but the Mets were lucky to get out of that inning unscathed. He picked up his third save, and the Mets were able to win the game by a score of 3-2. But just really an outstanding game by Baty and Alvarez. Also, credit to Frankie Montas, who was not away from getting through 6 innings for the first time. Up to this point now, he's made 5 starts since coming off the IL. 3 of them have been very good. 2 of them not as good. He gave up, the 6 runs to the Pirates where he thought it was tipping pitches, 4 runs to the Yankees. Other 3 starts have been solid, and he's got his ERA in the 4s now. I think Frankie Montas is proving that he's going to be a good arm for this Mets team. And I think while, of course, it would have been great to have him for the full season, my hope at this point is you're going to be getting the absolute best version of Frankie Montas when it matters most. But I think he's already starting to round into real regular season form. You're going to see that progression throughout August. And then come September, this is going to be a very fresh arm, a very high octane arm who really could be a guy that all of a sudden you sort of rely on down the stretch. We saw it the Dodgers last year. They had these guys that weren't necessarily part of the rotation all year, but were fresh when it mattered most. And Walker Buehler and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. You could see something similar with the Mets this year with Montas, with Sean Manaea, and of course with Kodai Senga. Going to talk about Sean Manaea a little bit to close out the show as we get into some of the pitching discussion for this team. The Mets also have a couple guys who are set to return off the IL sooner rather than later that we'll talk about. But what I want to really get into in the next segment is if the Mets have found their ideal starting lineup. And if they have, boy, is it a very homegrown lineup. I want to talk about what the Mets put out there on Tuesday night here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CEO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. When I was using Monarch, I was shocked at how much money I was spending on subscriptions that I wasn't even using. Even more importantly, I started to realize that takeout adds up. It's a quiet killer to your finances, and I realized that using Monarch. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you know whenever an episode drops and also when we go live. After the final out of every single game, you're going to get Chris Schubert giving you postcasts to break down whatever had happened. So you want that instant reaction. You'll have that here with Locked On Mets. And today, we will see. I might be able to get back for a postcast, typically for a day game. Chris isn't always available. I'm going to try to, but I also have to pick up my grandmother at the airport, bring her back to her place. So I don't know by the time I get through all of that and I'm listening to the game on the radio, if I will be in time for a postcast. But look out for one. There is a chance that you'll get me live to break down the final game of the Mets series against the Angels. But what I want to talk about right now is the starting lineup the Mets put out there on Tuesday night, because it was 7 homegrown Mets and 2 guys who got paid over $1 billion combined to play for the New York Mets, and Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. So 2 mega superstars, and then a bunch of guys the Mets drafted and developed or signed when they were teenagers internationally and developed. Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso, and Jeff McNeil. Those guys have been part of this core for some time now, ever since the 2019 season. All of those guys have been central figures. Obviously, for Nimmo, dates back a little bit longer. He really started to be a key cog 2016, 2017. But all those guys, again, drafted and developed by the New York Mets. For Alonso, McNeil, they have reached the height of being all-stars in a Mets uniform. For Nimmo, never been an all-star, but did get a contract over $100 million to return to the Mets after what was clearly an all-star caliber season in 2022. And he's had plenty of those in a Mets uniform before and after. Now, when you look at the rest of this lineup, again, Lindor, Soto, your 2 huge external acquisitions to this roster. Then you get to the lower half of that lineup. And for this game, it was Mark Vientos at DH, Brett Baty at second base at first, then to close the game at third. Francisco Alvarez behind the dish, and Ronnie Mauricio started at third. That bottom 4 is the wave of young players that, quite frankly, I have been covering on this show since 2019. Guys that were prospects that we were following along with, doing, who are the top 10 prospects in the Mets farm system? Is it Alvarez? Is it Baty? Is it Mauricio? Is it Vientos? We've been talking about these guys for years. And since the end of 2022, we have seen these guys pass through and try to establish themselves as big leaguers. But as I continue to talk about on this show, development is not linear. And it has taken some time for these guys to fully establish themselves. But now all of a sudden you are seeing that big league experience shining through. You're seeing guys who maybe are no longer as phased by playing under the bright lights, and guys that are maybe getting out of their way a little bit mentally and starting to just focus on what they control, which is their daily grind, their routine, how they put themselves in a good position to be the best version of themselves on a given night, how they can button up their defense, how they can put together professional long at-bats. And all of a sudden, these guys are becoming a really nice quartet at the bottom of the lineup. And there's something to be said about guys that have experience playing together. There's something to be said about Brett Baty and Francisco Alvarez that have shared lineups together since they were teenagers. That when Brett Baty doubles in front of Francisco Alvarez, that's not an unfamiliar feeling. And Alvarez, it's his time to step up and win a baseball game. And so it's really cool when you can get the homegrown players all up at the same time. It's just, there's something about it that feels a little more special, a little more unity, guys that are pulling for each other a little bit more. In a lot of ways, especially if you look at Vientos, Baty, and Mauricio, these are guys that have been competing with each other for playing time, but it doesn't feel like any of them has an ego about themselves and about that internal competition. It does feel like they all pull for each other. They all really like each other. And that just makes for a fun team to watch. And I can't think of a time the Mets have had this many homegrown guys in one lineup. 7 of 9. Granted, it's 2 different eras, or maybe 3 if you want to say Nimmo was a slight era ahead of Alonso McNeil. But yeah, it's 2 eras of Mets baseball, guys that were developed at different times. But that's what it takes to be a good team, is to be able to bring in different waves of players. And we've talked about that actually in the past too. I did shows last year, like which wave of the Mets was going to be the best one. Was it the Alonso McNeil wave? Was it this current wave of young players with Alvarez, Baty, Vientos, and now Mauricio? Or would it be the future wave? Would it be the Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, who else might come up around that time? Nick Morabito, Ryan Clifford, the next wave of top prospects that could filter their way through. And as much as we yearn for Jet Williams to be the second baseman of the New York Mets down the stretch because he's having a great season, pushing himself to the point where he should be in AAA, at some point by the end of this season, and a guy that will be knocking on the door of an opening day spot, even potentially in 2026, you can get excited and dream about Jet. And I think Jet's a really good young player, a guy that, is nearly untouchable, if not untouchable at this deadline. I look at the Mets position player prospects, and the two guys I'm holding on to the tightest are Jet Williams and Carson Bench, guys that I do believe can be better potentially than this young wave of players that is on the roster currently. But will Jet Williams and or Carson Bench be better than these guys in 2026 or 2027? That you don't know, because that last stage of development of getting up to the big leagues and having success and sustained success at the big leagues, it's the hardest part. And only the absolute best players can make a seamless transition to the big leagues. For a lot of guys, there's going to be struggles. But now you're watching Brett Baty really come into his own, and it does feel like the Mets have now a everyday player in Baty. Whether it's at second base or third base, he has got himself to a point defensively where he is an asset on that side of the ball, no matter which spot you put him in. And the at-bats get better and better and better. Francisco Alvarez, that demotion did him wonders. I think it put a chip right back on his shoulder, and Alvy's a good guy to have a chip on his shoulder. It's funny. He comes up and all of a sudden he's back to speaking with the translator, and, by all means, whatever he wants to do. But it's almost like Alvarez has taken on a different persona. He's going to be a little bit more quiet, not going to be out there quite as much. He went with a shaved look. He's got just a mustache now, which, hey, Mike Piazza had a good mustache. You never know. That can work for a catcher. But it just seems like Alvarez is kind of tunnel vision right now in a good way. He is confident in his abilities again. He feels good in the box. He feels dangerous in the box. He looks like the guy that was an absolute force as a hitter. I've talked about it before when it came to Alvarez and how he got up to the big leagues. His bat was always what was pushing him along quickly in the minors, and his glove was trailing behind. And then when Omar Narvaez went down in 2023, all of a sudden Francisco Alvarez gets called up due to his glove, because he was the guy in the 40-man roster who was close enough to being big league ready as a catcher and trying to keep up with the demands of being a starting catcher in the big leagues. I think it took away from his focus on his bat a little bit over the last couple of years. But now you get demoted and you have to deal with that embarrassment. He doesn't take it that way. He takes it as a challenge. Okay, you're sending me down. I have 72 hours to report. I'm going to show up the next day, and I'm going to do everything I can each day to improve on everything that the coaches tell me to improve on, so that I have to be in the minor leagues for the minimum amount of time. And now here he is back 2 games in a row. It's Francisco Alvarez that gets the biggest hit, particularly the 2-run homer tonight. And Baty has been the guy that's been on base in front of him for both of his huge hits. If those two guys live up to the promise that they had when they were the top 2 prospects in this system, and then you have Mark Vientos, who's already shown that he can be a star-level hitter at the big league level when he's right, and he is coming out of a little bit. He has been swinging a better bat lately. All of a sudden, if that's what you have batting behind Jeff McNeil, 6, 7, and 8 in your starting lineup, I honestly don't even care who's batting ninth if those 3 guys are hitting right. Not to mention Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso are marred in a deep slump. If those guys start to hit, if Nimmo and Soto continue to do what they're doing with Nimmo providing you an ideal at-bat from the leadoff spot, Soto, who has just been awesome for months now, Jeff McNeil, who's been a consistent threat in the middle of that lineup, in the back of the lineup, wherever they decide to put him, but he has been really good, particularly batting against relief pitchers late, getting clutch hits, always having tough at-bats, seeing a lot of pitches, fouling pitches off, driving the baseball more than he has in the past. This lineup can be so dangerous, and you don't need to go out there and make a move, because I don't know the move you're going to make. I don't know who you're going to go out there and get that's going to change this team, especially if you're not going to shop at third base, which David Stern said. So if you're taking Eugenio Suarez off the board, I don't know who the impact bat is you're trading for. You have to clear a bar at second base or center field. And right now, Jeff McNeil is setting that bar pretty high in center field. Now, you can have him at second base, which would improve this team, because the one thing that I'm still not entirely convinced of is if Ronnie Mauricio should be getting everyday run for a World Series contender when Mauricio hasn't gotten the same amount of time to develop as a hitter, as a fielder in the big leagues, the way Baty, Alvarez, and Vientos has certainly with the bat. So that's the one question mark to me. But if he continues to do his thing and you still have the ability whenever you want to stick Luis Angel Acuna at second base and have a elite defender there, or have Baty as the defender at second with Vientos not being the best defender at third, but able to start a game there against a lefty, and you always can have then Starling Marte DH, then all right, you're looking at a team that has a lot of options they can play with. And if ultimately ends up being, Jesse Winker actually comes back and he's hitting, maybe your playoff lineup ends up with Vientos at third base after all, and Baty at second and Winker at DH. They have some internal options. But to me, what is known at this point more than anything is Brett Baty should be a starter on this team. And Francisco Alvarez is looking like a man on a mission who very well could be a huge asset to this team defensively and offensively down the stretch and be a catcher that really is a difference maker when it matters most. And if those two things are true about this Mets team and Vientos can just hold down that DH spot and hit, again, really doesn't matter what you do with that last spot in the lineup. At that point, even start Tyrone Taylor and move Jeff McNeil back to second base. Even that would be a solid lineup. You can have one guy in your lineup that's not the best hitter if the other 8 are. And the Mets are looking like a team that has a deeper lineup than they've had in some time. So it's exciting to see these homegrown players maybe finally all come into their own at the same time. And if they can, in the context of winning baseball with a team that certainly has enough star power with Lindor, Soto, Alonso, and Brandon Nimmo, you're in a good spot. You're in a really good spot. We'll see if the Mets can finish off the sweep on Wednesday. I want to talk about that game a little bit. Who will the Mets have pitching beyond Sean Manaea? Could Jose Budo make his return? And when will we see Paul Blackburn again? That could be coming soon as well. I'll get to all of that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait around? No, you called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more who's handling this. And the AI agent handles after-hour calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer again. OpenPhone is offering Locked On Mets listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's OpenPhone, OpenPhone.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the match. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways and get a live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, Jose Budo could make his return to the mound today after Sean Manaea. Budo was sick. He went on the IL with an illness. He made his first rehab appearance on July 15th. That was in the Florida Complex League. This is the one league that was playing during the All-Star break. He got an inning, gave up a hit, struck out a batter, did not allow a run. He pitched an inning on July 18th, a couple of days later. I guess that would have been 2 days rest for his next appearance. Allowed 2 hits, struck out 1, another scoreless inning. Then pitched on just a day's rest on Sunday. Scoreless inning, struck out 1. He's now had 2 days to rest up for a potential return. He could pitch in Syracuse if the Mets decide that, or maybe it might even be Brooklyn, just trying to figure out the logistics. I'm not sure when Syracuse is going to play. So there is a chance that Syracuse, let's see, Syracuse have a night game. Not that it really matters, but we'll check it out since I got the page pulled up right here. But if they want to, they can send him somewhere else. But they mentioned on the broadcast that Ron Darling had talked to Jose Budo that day and asked him how he was feeling, and he said 100%. So I think Budo probably makes a return. Syracuse is playing a night game, so there is a chance that they could send him out to Syracuse in time. But I'm sure Jose Budo, who was with the team for this game, obviously, on Tuesday night, would not want to end up on a bus or a car or however you can get out to Syracuse just to pitch an inning in a game. I think he'd much rather help the New York Mets against the Angels, and I expect that he will do so. So getting Jose Budo back will go a long way to further solidifying this bullpen right now. You have Edwin Diaz, Brooks Raley, Reed Garrett, Ryan Stanek, and Huascar Brasman. Those have been the 5 guys coming out of the break that you can trust and leverage. Obviously, we know Stanek has been very up and down. Brazaban's been up and down. Even Garrett has been up and down after an incredible start to the season, which really mirrored what he did last year, where he was one of the nastiest relievers in baseball, and then seems like he maybe wears down a little bit. Hopefully he'll come on strong. But adding Budo back into the fold is huge for this team because Jose Budo was really throwing the ball as well as anybody when he went down. So you add Budo back in, it gives you another guy that can give you multiple innings. We still don't know how long Sean Manaea has to pitch in these games as he's continuing to work his way back. I think it's going to be 5 innings at most for Sean Manaea in this start. So if he can get you through 5, maybe Budo gets you through 7. And then all of a sudden you could turn it over to Raley and Diaz if the game is close and, potentially complete a sweep. So having Budo back does a lot for this bullpen. He could either replace Justin Garza, who was just brought up to replace Kevin Herget today, or Alex Carrillo, who I think the Mets still like and still want to see more out of. But obviously he struggled greatly coming out of the break in that first appearance. So we'll see how much more run he gets. I wouldn't be surprised if it is Garza that goes down first and they give Carrillo another opportunity to pitch. But he is a guy that clearly has those options that will get utilized at some point when the Mets look for a fresh arm. And speaking of a fresh arm, Paul Blackburn could enter the fold here very soon. He made a rehab start in Syracuse on Tuesday, did very well, allowed 1 run on 3 hits, 1 walk, struck out 5 through 72 pitches. Now, Blackburn also pitched in the FCL last week. He went 3 2/3, pitched on 4 days rest in this game on Tuesday. You would think that he honestly probably could be ready to return for his next appearance. I would not be surprised at all if the Mets said, "Oh, get one more outing. Let's get you over 85 pitches," because that would kick the can down the road a little bit. Then he would pitch on Sunday, which would line him up to potentially pitch on Friday. The Mets are off on Thursday, so it would basically clear the deadline when it comes to a Paul Blackburn decision. So that's what I would expect, that he would make one more rehab start on Sunday, and that just allows you to sort of wait and see what you're going to do there. Blackburn could be a long man in this bullpen, something they've toyed with a little bit so far this year, but he hasn't done well in that role in limited opportunities, and then he's just been constantly dealing with nagging injuries. There's also a world where the Mets just decide, you know what, for us, Paul Blackburn is not going to be the answer this season, so let's send him somewhere else. We don't know if the Mets actually are going to make a trade to address their starting rotation. It feels like they're not. It feels like they're very happy with Montas, with Manaea, with Senga, with Peterson. They aren't planning to shut down Clay Holmes anytime soon. So that could be their 5-man rotation. They still have Tylor McGill, who very well could make a return. I would imagine most likely you would think September, but again, that's a potential iron in the fire that you could have at some point down the line. And then you have your top prospects in Nolan McClain and Brandon Sproat, who I think either of them could help the rotation or the bullpen after the deadline. So you could, if a team is looking for a starting pitcher and you don't have a place for Paul Blackburn in your rotation and you don't think he's going to thrive as a long man, maybe you could flip him at the deadline. I don't think you're going to get much for him, but there's a world where you could trade him and get a low-level prospect. There's also a world where you can trade him in a deal where you're getting a starting pitcher in return from a team that maybe is willing to sell their pitching but not entirely punt on the season. So the example that I would use there is, let's just say the Royals decide, you know what, they have to take advantage of the opportunity to sell high on Seth Lugo. And the Mets decide Seth Lugo is a good enough starting pitcher that they can add to their rotation. He would be a guy that would get a playoff start. Well, maybe Paul Blackburn is just another piece that's thrown in that deal, not one that moves the needle, but just another piece for the Royals to have to stick a guy in their rotation so that they can still maybe hang around the wild card race. I think there's a trade like that where maybe Blackburn does get moved, but he also could just be a guy that you stick in your bullpen, and he is just depth. And you have him stretched out, and you have him piggyback some guys. You might be able to line them up with a Clay Holmes, line him up with the Sean Manaea, whatever it is. One of these guys that maybe you aren't sure you're going to get too much length out of. And Blackburn can, finish off some games. But the reality is he is going to be ready soon. And you can't just keep a healthy starting pitcher wasting away on a rehab in Syracuse forever. So the Mets are going to have to make a move at some point. My guess, though, on Blackburn, we see one more rehab start that allows them to get through the deadline and sort of know where they're at and then make their decision on what they're going to do. Because who knows, if the Mets pick up 2 relievers at the deadline, I mean, you might be in a position where if you can't find a home for Blackburn, you cut him just because you don't have room for him and you want to keep 8 relievers in your bullpen. There's just a lot that could happen over the next week and change here. But it's good to see that he made a start, fully stretched out. And as much as you could knock Paul Blackburn and not necessarily want to see him in this rotation, I think I'd still rather see Paul Blackburn making a spot start if you had to in front of a Kodai Senga start at some point. I think I'd rather see Blackburn getting the ball in that type of a situation than I want to see Justin Hagenman or Brandon Waddell or even Blade Tidwell again. Now, I'd prefer to see the top prospects get one of those spot starts. But I guess that is a conversation for another day. Right now, the Mets are watching this rotation round into form, and that's what's going to be so important to watch today when it comes to the Mets game versus the Angels. It's another start to see what you have in Sean Manaea. And I guess this would be your second to last one, I think. You might get one more Manaea start before the deadline that you can take a final look and know what you have. Let me see exactly how it's going to line up. So you'll have Manaea going for this game here against the Angels. You'll have a day off on Thursday. Then you're going to have going up against the Giants. You will have Holmes, Peterson, and Senga lined up to pitch in that series. You will then have probably Montas, Manaea, and I guess it would be right back to Holmes before the deadline. So we'll see. We'll see how the Mets decide to deploy Blackburn whenever that comes, and we'll see how Manaea, Montas, and Senga continue to acclimate themselves. Seems like the Mets are going to really rely on that trio, though, to sort of be their boost to this rotation that you'd want this time of year, where they don't have to go out and necessarily trade for somebody in a market that's not very deep with starting pitchers anyway, because you just got some really impactful arms off the injured list who still have not gotten into, really fully stretched out regular season form, where all of them, I think, could end up being guys that do pitch deep into games. There's no reason why Kodai Senga can't get back to consistently pitching into the 6th and the 7th inning. There's no reason why Montas can't get there as well. He was very close to doing so tonight. And Manaea, we know what he can do when he's right. He can be very efficient with his pitches because he can really just attack the zone with that fastball. So I think the best days are still ahead for this rotation, but you're also dealing with a ticking clock of time you have left to make a move. And that's what makes this time of year so fascinating. Like I mentioned earlier, I very well could do a postcast if I get home soon enough to give you that live show after the game. Also coming ahead this week, we're going to be doing a show breaking down the Mets draft. So that's going to be a lot of fun to go through all the different players the Mets selected over the All-Star break. We're going to talk about the deadline more and more, of course, as it nears. A lot of good stuff ahead. I appreciate all of you continue to tune in. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts as well as league-wide experts that'll take you through all of the action. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.